She landed hard knees, scraped, pride bruised while the potato salad hit the grass beside her. Amanda, her daughter-in-law, didn't reach down. She just sipped her lemonade and said, "Oops, gravity wins again." Laughter rippled across the backyard. But Margaret didn't cry. She got up, brushed off her sundress, and smiled like someone who'd already made the call. 3 days later, every one of them opened their mailbox to a letter that didn't come with an apology. Before we begin, may I ask where in this big, beautiful world are you listening from? It's always a quiet honor to know who's sharing this space. Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. Joan stared at her phone, watching as Mark's name appeared, then vanished just as quickly. Her thumb hovered over the screen, debating whether to call back. The rejection wasn't new, but it always felt like a sharp sting. She had learned to expect this from him, learned to live with the ghosting, but it never stopped hurting. Not really. The call wasn't a surprise. Mark had always been good at disappearing when things got complicated. The first few times it happened, Joan was confused, even hurt. But now, it was just part of the pattern. His name flashing only to disappear again, wasn't it a reminder that she wasn't enough? That she wasn't worth more than a brief flicker in his life? Maybe that's all I ever was, Joan thought bitterly. Just a flicker. She shoved the phone into her bag with a sigh. She was tired of it, of hoping for something that wasn't coming, of waiting for him to acknowledge her, to reach out. But even as she told herself she was done, her fingers itched to dial again, to try one more time. What harm could one more call do? But that fear of rejection, that ever-present dread, paralyzed her. She couldn't make herself do it. Not today. From the backyard, the sounds of laughter drifted in, drawing Joan's attention. The BBQ was still going strong, and her son, his wife, and their friends were gathered around the grill. Joan knew she should join them. She had tried, but something about it didn't feel right anymore. She caught sight of Karen, her daughter-in-law, who, in the midst of conversation, suddenly tripped. The others laughed as Karen regained her balance. Then, with exaggerated grace, Karen shrugged and said, "Oops, gravity wins again," drawing more laughter from the group. Joan froze, the words hitting her like a physical blow. Gravity wins again. It wasn't just a comment about Karen's stumble. It felt like a dig. The world laughed at her, too. Or maybe she was just imagining it. But the laughter seemed to echo in her ears, like a reminder that she was past her prime, that she wasn't important enough to be taken seriously anymore. It stung more than she expected. Joan wanted to laugh it off, to brush it aside as just a harmless joke. But instead, she grabbed her journal from the counter, the one place where she could make sense of the chaos in her head. With a deep breath, she opened it and began to write. The words came slowly at first, but soon they were flowing out, clear and decisive. One more try. She wasn't sure why she wrote it. Maybe it was to remind herself that there was still hope. Or maybe it was just to say that she wasn't done yet, that she could still fight for something. She wasn't sure what she was fighting for, but she wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. Joan closed the journal with a snap, tucking it into her bag. She didn't know exactly what she would do next, but she knew she had to take control. She couldn't just sit back and wait for things to change on their own. It was time to act. She stepped outside, the warmth of the sun washing over her. The BBQ was still in full swing, and the sounds of conversation and laughter were louder now. But it didn't feel like she belonged here anymore. She didn't know where she fit, didn't know how to re-enter this world that seemed to have moved on without her. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. Joan's heart skipped a beat. She pulled it out, half expecting it to be Mark. But when she looked at the screen, her stomach dropped. It wasn't Mark. It was from her attorney. "Ready when you are." Joan's pulse quickened. The words were simple, but they hit her harder than she expected. She had asked for this, had asked to be notified when it was time. And now it was time. There was no going back. Joan wasn't sure if she was ready for whatever was next, but there was no turning back now. Joan sank into the couch, phone in hand, the dim light from the living room casting long shadows. Her thumb hovered over the voicemail inbox, trembling just slightly as she scrolled through years of messages, each one a plea. The first one was a sharp memory her voice, sounding younger, hopeful, desperate. "Mark, it's me again. I don't know what happened, why you're avoiding me. Please, I need to hear from you. Please call me back." She closed her eyes as it ended. The sound of her own voice, raw and uncertain, hanging in the air like a bad taste. How could I have let myself sound so small? She thought. She scrolled to the next message. I don't understand, Mark. We've been through so much, and now you're just gone. Please. I can't keep doing this without you. I miss you so much. The desperation in her words made her chest tighten. She could almost feel herself back in that moment, on the edge of some invisible precipice, always hoping for him to reach out, to say something, anything. But it never came. Joan paused, the flood of memories overwhelming her. Each message was a tiny thread in the unraveling of her own dignity. Each one proof that she had been the one to chase, the one to fix. She was tired of it, tired of being the one who cared enough to try. With a sharp exhale, Joan shut the phone and set it on the coffee table. The silence in the room was suffocating. She reached for her journal, her haven for unspoken words, and began to write again. One more letter, she told herself. Just one more try. But as she put pen to paper, she paused. What was the point? Another letter would only be more of the same. It wouldn't change anything. She wasn't going to send it. Tired. That was the word that kept coming to her. Tired of the pattern. Tired of the never-ending cycle of trying and failing. She closed the journal and tucked it away, determined that this time she wasn't going to beg anymore. Her phone buzzed, interrupting the stillness. It was Emma. Joan, listen to me. Emma's voice was direct, but soft, as it always was. You can't keep doing this. You can't keep reaching for someone who isn't reaching back. It's time you focused on yourself. Joan opened her mouth to argue, but the words caught in her throat. She had never really considered it stopping the calls, the messages, the endless efforts to fix things with Mark. It seemed wrong somehow, like giving up. I know it's hard, Emma continued, but you deserve to take care of yourself. You've been putting everyone else first for so long. Joan swallowed, the weight of Emma's words settling into her bones. Could she do this? Could she walk away for a little while? I'll stop, Joan said, her voice small. 1 week. That's all I can do. The decision was harder than she expected, but something in her shifted. She needed space, time to rebuild. For the first time in years, she was going to give herself a break from Mark. The week passed slowly. At the local volunteer center, Joan found herself immersed in the people she helped. They didn't need her to fix anything. They just needed her presence. The warmth of their gratitude was soothing, and slowly, she began to feel like herself again. Not Mark's partner, not her children's mother, just Joan. But as the week wore on, Joan realized something she hadn't anticipated. Her value didn't lie in fixing others. It didn't lie in Mark's approval. Just as Joan was starting to feel like herself again, her phone buzzed with a news alert. Local hero interviewed live. Her heart skipped. What was this? Could it be someone she knew? Or was it about her? Joan froze, staring at the screen, waiting for the next twist. Joan stood in front of the camera, the bright light softening the lines of her face, casting her in a glow that felt surreal. She hadn't expected to be here, hadn't expected to speak so openly about her volunteer work at the center. But here she was, her voice calm, more steady than she had ever known it to be. She smiled, almost to herself, as the interviewer asked her about the work she did. It's not about fixing anyone, Joan said, her voice carrying with unexpected conviction. It's about showing up. It's about being there for someone who feels like they have no one. Sometimes, just being present is enough. The words seemed to hang in the air long after they left her mouth. She had never felt this sure of herself before. In the past, she'd been the one trying to be perfect, to prove she was enough. But today, she felt whole. The confidence she had always sought was there, shining in the most unexpected way. When the interview wrapped up, Joan stepped away from the camera, a quiet pride swelling in her chest. She wasn't just Joan the mother, or Joan the wife. She was Joan the volunteer, Joan the woman who had found her voice. And for the first time, it didn't feel small. The segment aired a few days later. Joan sat, waiting, her fingers tapping nervously on the edge of the coffee table. When the local news segment finally appeared, her heart pounded in her chest. She watched as the camera panned to her smiling face, as she spoke with such ease about her work at the center. The woman on the screen was someone she barely recognized, but in the best way possible. Almost immediately, the feedback started pouring in. Texts, messages, comments on social media. Everyone was praising her for her work, for her strength. The community, once distant, was suddenly paying attention. Joan couldn't help but marvel at how quickly things had shifted. It was overwhelming, yet exhilarating. She replayed the segment over and over again, watching herself speak with more ease than she ever thought possible. This is who I am now, she thought. And she liked this version of herself, this woman who didn't need approval, who was enough on her own. But then a quiet thought crept in, one that she couldn't shake. Would Mark see this? Would he recognize that this wasn't just about him anymore? Joan wondered if, in his absence, she had finally moved forward without him. As the days went on, Joan couldn't escape the strange combination of pride and uncertainty. She felt empowered by the attention she was receiving, but at the same time, it felt suffocating. Every compliment, every message from the community only reminded her of the private pain still lodged in her chest. She had worked so hard to get here, to find herself outside of Mark's shadow. But was it enough? Was this new identity really her? Or was it just a product of a world that had finally recognized her? Joan struggled to reconcile this public persona with the woman she had been for so long, the one who had poured all of her energy into Mark, into her family, into everyone but herself. Does he even see me anymore? She wondered. Was it too late for him to recognize the changes in her? Or had he already moved on? Later that evening, Joan sat in the quiet of her living room, her phone in her hand. She had been avoiding it, but now she couldn't stop herself. She unlocked the screen, her thumb hovering over the missed calls. There it was, a missed call from a blocked number. Her pulse quickened, a rush of hope and dread mixing in her chest. Was it him? After all this time, was he finally reaching out? She stared at the screen, unsure of what to do. Should she call back? Or was this just another reminder of the years spent chasing someone who wasn't ready to catch her? Joan's breath caught in her throat, the silence in the room thick with the weight of the decision before her. The past and the future seemed to collide in that moment, and she couldn't move. The phone buzzed again. Joan's phone buzzed again, the familiar name flashing on the screen. Mark! Her heart lurched in her chest, a mix of hope and fear tightening around her. She hesitated, thumb hovering over the green button. What was he doing? Why now? She pressed it. Hi, came Mark's voice, flat and distant. That single word hung in the air, and before she could even respond, he hung up. Joan sat there, staring at the screen. Hi. That was it. Nothing more. No mom, no warmth, no connection, just a word that felt so empty, so unrecognizable. Her fingers trembled as she replayed the moment in her mind. Was that progress? Or had she just imagined a breakthrough where there was none? Her mind raced. Why now? Why call at all? The silence after the call felt heavier than it had before. Was he testing the waters? Or was he just unsure of what to say? The uncertainty gnawed at her, like an itch that wouldn't go away. The woman she had become, the one confident enough to stand on her own, felt vulnerable in that moment. She needed something more, but she wasn't sure if that something would ever come. The next day, Joan sat at her kitchen table, her coffee cooling beside her, her phone resting in front of her. Then a text arrived, short but significant. Saw you on television. Joan's heart skipped. It wasn't much, but it was enough to stir something deep inside her. After all this time, after all the silence, this was his way of acknowledging her. It was the smallest step, but it felt like the start of something. She didn't hesitate. Her fingers moved swiftly over the keys. That means the world. Love you. She hit send before she could second-guess herself, before she could worry about how it would be received. But the silence that followed her message was suffocating. She didn't expect an immediate reply. She hadn't expected anything at all. Really, but the waiting felt unbearable. She tried to distract herself, diving into her volunteer work and her day-to-day routines, but the waiting never stopped gnawing at her. It felt like she was holding her breath, waiting for a sign that he would reach out in return, that the silence wouldn't just stretch on indefinitely. Later, sitting in her counselor's office, Joan recounted the events, her fingers gripping the edges of the chair. He called. Well, he said hi. Joan's voice cracked slightly. betraying the rawness she felt. Her counselor nodded gently, her gaze steady and understanding. "It's a start," she said softly. "You've made progress. It's not going to happen overnight." Joan swallowed hard, the weight of those words sinking in. She wanted to believe it, really, she did. But how could she not feel the pull to reach out again, to make him see how far she'd come, to demand the connection she so desperately craved? "You've spent so long chasing him," her counselor continued, leaning forward slightly. "This is your moment to act differently, to let him come to you in his own time." Joan bit her lip, the familiar tug inside her, the urge to reach out, to fill the silence. What if he's never ready, she wondered. What if this is all there will ever be? But a part of her, a part she hadn't recognized until now, wanted to give him the space, to let it rest. She didn't want to chase anymore. She had already given so much of herself to trying to fix things, to make him see her. But now that she had found herself again, it was time to act differently. The change was subtle, but it was there, rippling beneath her skin. Maybe this was the shift she'd been waiting for. Maybe this was the moment where everything began to change, not just for her and Mark, but for herself. For the first time, Joan wasn't waiting for him to validate her. She was learning how to be whole without him. But as the days passed, she felt the distance between them growing. Mark's hesitation was a mirror of the years they had lost, the years he'd kept himself hidden from her, the years she'd tried so hard to fix. Was this the beginning of something newer, the final confirmation that they were too far apart to ever truly reconnect? Her phone buzzed again, interrupting her thoughts. "This is your moment." Her counselor's words echoed in her mind. Joan looked down at the screen. There was another message from Mark. It was one sentence, but it would change everything. Joan sat in the quiet of the living room, the soft hum of the evening around her. Her phone lay on the table, glowing faintly in the dim light. She hadn't expected much after all. Mark's last message had been so brief, so distant. But she couldn't stop herself from checking again, hoping for something more. Her heart skipped when she saw the notification. It was a message from Mark. Asterisk. Missed hearing you. Asterisk. 3 small words. They should have meant nothing, just a simple, passing acknowledgement. But they hit Joan like a tidal wave. Her fingers trembled as she stared at the screen, her pulse quickening. It was everything she had longed for, and yet it wasn't enough. It was a door, slightly ajar, a glimpse of something she wasn't sure she could reach. She opened the message, read it again. "Missed hearing you." Asterisk. Her mind swirled with possibilities. Should she respond right away? Should she match his openness, give him the reassurance he might be looking for? But as the moments stretched on, Joan's hesitation grew. She had been here before rushing in, pushing too hard, always reaching for something that felt just out of reach. But now, she wasn't sure if this was the moment to jump in head first. For the first time in years, Joan held back. She let the phone sit on the table, the words still glowing on the screen, waiting for her. Asterisk. Don't rush it. Asterisk, she told herself. This time, you wait. Let it come to you. Asterisk. The stillness of the house pressed in, the space between her and Mark suddenly feeling vast and unknown. The dinner table that had once been a place of easy conversation now felt distant, unfamiliar. She tried to focus on the food in front of her, but her thoughts were fixed on the phone. Her fingers itched to pick it up, to type something in to fill the silence between them. But she kept them still, determined to hold on to the control she had only recently learned to embrace. The evening dragged on, the quiet stretching between her and the world outside. Joan didn't sleep much that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she found herself looking at the message again. "Missed hearing you." Asterisk. The simplicity of it unsettled her. It was as if he was trying to reach out, but not quite sure how to bridge the gap. She had spent so many years chasing, hoping, fixing. Now, she had to let him make the next move. The hours slipped by, and in the stillness, Joan found herself thinking about all the things that had brought her here, about the space she had created in her life for something new. She wasn't the woman who had clung to the past, to the hope that Mark would change, that he would come back to her. She had changed, and now, this was the test. Would she let him come to her, or would she go to him, as she always had? Finally, late into the night, she couldn't stand it anymore. She opened the message again, her breath shallow. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, and for a moment, she just sat there, the weight of it all sinking in. The uncertainty, the longing, the fear. It was all there, swirling in the space between them. She typed her reply slowly, carefully. Missed you too? Asterisk. It wasn't much, just a quiet acknowledgement, but it felt like enough for now. She hit send before she could second-guess herself. Joan sat back, staring at the screen. The message had been sent, but now she had to wait. The wait felt endless, stretching out in front of her like a road she wasn't sure she wanted to walk. What if he didn't reply? What if this was as far as it would go? She closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. Asterisk, push, don't chase. Asterisk. She whispered the words to herself, as if they could anchor her in this moment of uncertainty. The phone remained still. Joan could feel the space between hope and fear widening. Her heart caught somewhere in the middle, torn between wanting more and knowing she had already given enough. Whatever happened next, she knew this moment would change everything. But the phone remained silent. Joan stared at the phone, her heart sinking as she saw the "Read at 2:17 p.m." notification. He had seen her message. He had read it. But still, no reply. She couldn't breathe for a moment, her mind racing with questions. Why hasn't he replied? The uncertainty began to crush her chest. She had waited so patiently. She'd held back, hoping he would reach out, but instead, she was left in this silence, waiting for something that felt so far out of her control. Joan turned the phone over and set it down on the table. The words that she had so carefully crafted now felt like a burden she couldn't carry. She didn't know what to do next, but she knew one thing. She couldn't keep waiting like this. Later that day, she met Emma at the usual cafe, hoping the conversation would clear her mind. Joan slumped into the chair, her coffee untouched. Emma watched her carefully, sensing the unease. I don't know if I'm doing this right, Joan admitted, her voice small. I thought I was moving on, that I was finally finding peace. But now, this. He read my message, and now he's just silent. Emma didn't rush to speak. She sipped her coffee and then looked at Joan, her gaze soft but intense. Joan, I think you're letting his silence define you again. You've spent so much time waiting for Mark to give you closure, but you need to find it for yourself. You're not just waiting for him to see you, you need to see yourself. Joan's chest tightened as Emma's words settled in. She had been so focused on what Mark might say, how he might react, she had forgotten to ask herself what she needed, what she deserved. I've been seeking his approval my whole life, Joan murmured, her eyes cast downward. I can't seem to stop. Emma's voice was steady. You've been looking for validation from him, but you need to validate yourself. You've done the work, Joan. You've grown. It's not about him anymore. Joan sat in silence, the weight of Emma's words sinking deeper. She had been so focused on Mark's response that she hadn't truly seen how far she had come on her own. The past few weeks, the time she had spent focusing on herself, the work at the center of this was all part of her journey. She wasn't just the woman who had once been Mark's, the one who lived for his approval. She was her own person, and that had to be enough. Later, at the center, Joan was helping an elderly woman with a puzzle when a neighbor, Mrs. Larson, stopped by. Mrs. Larson had always been kind, but today she gave Joan a look of quiet understanding. You know, Mrs. Larson said gently, taking Joan's hand, you matter here. You've made such a difference in this community, Joan. Not because anyone else says so, but because you're here. You've been steady, even when things were hard, and that counts for something. Joan blinked, her chest tightening with emotion. Mrs. Larson's words hit her in a way she hadn't expected. You matter. Joan had spent so much time seeking validation from Mark, from others, that she had forgotten she was enough as she was. For the first time in years, Joan let herself believe that. She was worthy, not because of Mark or anyone else but because of who she was, and that was enough. That evening, Joan found herself reflecting on what Mrs. Larson had said, the weight of the realization settling in. She had worked so hard to earn others' love and approval, but now, it was time to stop chasing that approval. It was time to accept herself. As she sat in the quiet of the living room, Joan's phone buzzed again. It was a missed call. Blocked number. Her heart skipped. Was this it? Was Mark finally reaching out? She stared at the screen, the anticipation building. Her emotions were a whirl of hope and fear. Joan took a deep breath, unsure of what would happen next, but ready for whatever came. Joan sat across from Emma in the familiar corner of the cafe, the same place they'd shared countless conversations. But today, the silence between them felt different. It wasn't the comfortable silence that came with years of friendship. It was heavy, filled with the weight of everything Joan had been holding back. She finally exhaled, her voice low. "I've been focused on Mark's approval for so long," she admitted, her eyes tracing the rim of her coffee cup. "I haven't even thought about what I need, what I want. I've been chasing something that might never come." Emma's gaze softened, her hand reaching across the table to rest. Sure, she wanted to walk. What if he didn't reply? What if this was as far as it would go? She closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. Asterisk, push, don't chase. Asterisk. She whispered the words to herself, as if they could anchor her in this moment of uncertainty. The phone remained still. Joan could feel the space between hope and fear widening. Her heart caught somewhere in the middle, torn between wanting more and knowing she had already given enough. Whatever happened next, she knew this moment would change everything. But the phone remained silent. Joan stared at the phone, her heart sinking as she saw the "read at 2:17 p.m." notification. He had seen her message. He had read it. But still, no reply. She couldn't breathe for a moment, her mind racing with questions. Why hasn't he replied? The uncertainty began to crush her chest. She had waited so patiently. She'd held back, hoping he would reach out, but instead, she was left in this silence, waiting for something that felt so far out of her control. Joan turned the phone over and set it down on the table. The words that she had so carefully crafted now felt like a burden she couldn't carry. She didn't know what to do next, but she knew one thing. She couldn't keep waiting like this. Later that day, she met Emma at the usual cafe, hoping the conversation would clear her mind. Joan slumped into the chair, her coffee untouched. Emma watched her carefully, sensing the unease. "I don't know if I'm doing this right," Joan admitted, her voice small. "I thought I was moving on, that I was finally finding peace. But now, this. He read my message, and now he's just silent." Emma didn't rush to speak. She sipped her coffee and then looked at Joan, her gaze soft but intense. "Joan, I think you're letting his silence define you again. You've spent so much time waiting for Mark to give you closure, but you need to find it for yourself. You're not just waiting for him to see you, you need to see yourself." Joan's chest tightened as Emma's words settled in. She had been so focused on what Mark might say, how he might react, she had forgotten to ask herself what she needed, what she deserved. "I've been seeking his approval my whole life," Joan murmured, her eyes cast downward. "I can't seem to stop." Emma's voice was steady. "You've been looking for validation from him, but you need to validate yourself. You've done the work, Joan. You've grown. It's not about him anymore." Joan sat in silence, the weight of Emma's words sinking deeper. She had been so focused on Mark's response that she hadn't truly seen how far she had come on her own. The past few weeks, the time she had spent focusing on herself, the work at the center of this was all part of her journey. She wasn't just the woman who had once been Mark's, the one who lived for his approval. She was her own person, and that had to be enough. Later, at the center, Joan was helping an elderly woman with a puzzle when a neighbor, Mrs. Larson, stopped by. Mrs. Larson had always been kind, but today she gave Joan a look of quiet understanding. "You know," Mrs. Larson said gently, taking Joan's hand, "you matter here. You've made such a difference in this community, Joan. Not because anyone else says so, but because you're here. You've been steady, even when things were hard, and that counts for something." Joan blinked, her chest tightening with emotion. Mrs. Larson's words hit her in a way she hadn't expected. You matter. Joan had spent so much time seeking validation from Mark, from others, that she had forgotten she was enough as she was. For the first time in years, Joan let herself believe that. She was worthy, not because of Mark or anyone else but because of who she was, and that was enough. That evening, Joan found herself reflecting on what Mrs. Larson had said, the weight of the realization settling in. She had worked so hard to earn others' love and approval, but now, it was time to stop chasing that approval. It was time to accept herself. As she sat in the quiet of the living room, Joan's phone buzzed again. It was a missed call. Blocked number. Her heart skipped. Was this it? Was Mark finally reaching out? She stared at the screen, the anticipation building. Her emotions were a whirl of hope and fear. Joan took a deep breath, unsure of what would happen next, but ready for whatever came. Joan sat across from Emma in the familiar corner of the cafe, the same place they'd shared countless conversations. But today, the silence between them felt different. It wasn't the comfortable silence that came with years of friendship. It was heavy, filled with the weight of everything Joan had been holding back. She finally exhaled, her voice low. "I've been focused on Mark's approval for so long," she admitted, her eyes tracing the rim of her coffee cup. "I haven't even thought about what I need, what I want. I've been chasing something that might never come." Emma's gaze softened, her hand reaching across the table to rest. For this moment, this raw vulnerability between them. She opened her mouth to say something, but the words didn't come. Instead, she stepped aside, her voice soft as she gestured him in. "Come in." Mark hesitated for a heartbeat, then stepped into the house. Joan closed the door behind him, the quiet of the room amplifying the tension between them. Neither of them knew how to begin, but they stood there, both unsure of the right words. Joan felt a nervous energy buzz in the air, the weight of everything unsaid hanging over them. Mark broke the silence, his voice still low but more steady now. "I've been overwhelmed," he admitted, his eyes searching the floor. "Everything this, all of it. I didn't know what to do, so I kept running from it." Joan felt her heart soften. She had expected anger, or at the very least, distance. But what she heard was uncertainty, vulnerability. She watched him, waiting for him to continue, but he didn't. The weight of his words hung between them, unspoken, just as the silence had. Joan took a deep breath, her mind swirling with thoughts and feelings she wasn't sure how to process. "I wasn't ready for you to need me," Mark said, his voice quieter now. "I wasn't ready for everything we've been through. I wasn't ready to be the man you needed." Joan's heart ached as she listened. It wasn't the answer she'd been hoping for, but it was something. Maybe it was the start of something. Maybe this was the beginning of them figuring it out, together. She didn't know. But in that moment, the tension between them softened, just slightly. The space felt a little less heavy. "You don't have to fix it all now," Joan said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I can't keep pretending it's okay either." Mark nodded, his eyes meeting hers. I know I've hurt you. I don't know what's going to happen next, but I'm here, and I want to try." The words weren't a promise, not yet, but it was a crack in the wall, a possibility. Joan wasn't sure what would come of this, but for the first time in a long time, she felt like they could move forward slowly, carefully, but together. Mark shifted, taking a step closer to her. "I know it's not going to be easy," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "But I'm not running anymore. I don't know if we can fix everything, but I don't want to lose you." Joan nodded, her heart swelling with something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in a long time. Hope. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't fixed, but it was real, and that was enough for now. They didn't know what the future would hold. Joan had spent so much time waiting for Mark to return to her, for him to come back to the woman he used to love. But she had learned something in these past few weeks. She had learned to stand on her own, to find herself without him, to realize that no matter what happened between them, she was enough. For the first time in a long while, Joan felt the faintest spark of hope. It wasn't about returning to what they had. It was about finding something new. And maybe, just maybe, that was something worth holding on to. Then Mark spoke again, his voice quieter than before, but full of something Joan hadn't heard in a long time. "Mom?" The question, simple but filled with so much emotion, hung in the air between them. Joan's breath caught in her throat as she looked at him. She hadn't realized how much she had been waiting to hear that word again, how much she needed it, even if it was still fragile, still uncertain. But in that moment, it felt like the beginning of something new. Joan stood there, the weight of the moment pressing down on her as she looked at Mark, the man who had been so much a part of her life, and yet so far away for so long. The word *mom? Asterisk hung in the air between them, full of raw emotion, and Joan felt something break inside her. It wasn't a loud crash, but a quiet, steady release, as if the years of distance between them had finally started to soften. Mark shifted, a small, unsure movement. He opened his arms, tentative, as if asking permission. Joan didn't hesitate. In one fluid motion, she stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him, pulling him close. The tension that had hung between them for so long melted away, replaced by something she hadn't felt in years, something warm, something real. Her body shook slightly as she held him, feeling the years of regret, fear, and missed opportunities dissolve. She wasn't sure how long they stood there, just holding each other, but when they finally pulled apart, neither of them spoke right away. There were no more words to fill the space. Mark looked at her, his eyes a mix of apology and something deeper, something Joan had been too afraid to recognize. "I'm sorry," he whispered, "for everything." Joan didn't try to offer comfort or advice. She didn't say that everything would be okay or that it was all in the past. She simply nodded, letting the silence do the talking. Sometime, there were no words that could fix what had been broken. Mark seemed to sense that. He swallowed hard, and then, for the first time in years, he opened up fully, his voice thick with shame. "I wasn't ready, Joan. I wasn't ready to be the man you needed me to be. And I ran from it. From you. From everything. I couldn't face how much I'd failed you. How much I'd failed us." Joan listened, her heart aching, but she didn't offer any answers. This wasn't the time for answers, or for pushing him to move past his shame. She simply held space for him, the same way she had learned to hold space for herself in the last few weeks. It was messy, painful, but it was real. "I didn't know how to fix it," he added, his voice breaking slightly. "I didn't know how to fix us." Joan reached out, brushing her hand gently across his arm. "We don't have to fix everything right now," she said softly. "We just need to start somewhere." There was no rush for closure, no rush for the answers they both wanted. They had been through too much, and neither was ready to offer easy solutions. Instead, they simply started talking. Not about the past, not right away, but about the future. There were no promises, no grand declarations of love, just a quiet conversation about what the next steps might look like. Slow, careful, honest. The doorbell rang, interrupting the fragile moment. Joan's heart skipped in her chest, the unexpected sound pulling her out of the bubble she and Mark had created in the room. Mark looked at her, confusion in his eyes, but Joan didn't feel the tension she had once felt. Instead, she walked to the door, her pulse steadying as she opened it. Standing there was Emma, her arms full of a tray with teacups, her usual smile lighting up her face. "I thought I'd bring something warm," she said, her eyes flicking over to Mark, then back to Joan. Joan smiled faintly, stepping aside to let her in. "Thanks, Emma." Mark stood awkwardly behind Joan, and for a moment, Joan felt the old familiar pull of fear. Would Emma sense the rawness of the moment? The shift between them? Would she ask what had happened? Demand answers that Joan wasn't ready to give? But Emma just smiled again, setting the tray down on the table. "Well," she said, glancing between Joan and Mark, "it seems like you two have had quite the conversation." Joan nodded, her chest lighter than it had been in a long time. "We're getting there," she said, her voice steady. She didn't know what the future held, didn't know if Mark would stay or if they could fix what had been broken. But for the first time in ages, she felt like there was hope, like there was a chance they could rebuild something together step by careful step. As they all sat down, the weight of the past started to shift, and Joan knew this was just the beginning. The conversation between her, Mark, and Emma felt like a bridge between the past and the future. It was small, fragile, but it was real. But then, as they settled in, the doorbell rang again. Joan's stomach tightened as she glanced at Emma, who had already risen to answer. What was this, another knock at the door? Another change to everything they had just started? Joan's heart raced again. What came next would define everything. Joan stood frozen, the weight of the moment pressing down on her as Mark stood at her door. His presence was familiar, yet distant years of silence had created a chasm between them. His eyes met hers, filled with emotion, but neither spoke. The silence was thick, stretching uncomfortably between them. Finally, Mark broke the quiet. Hi. Joan blinked, her heart pounding. She hadn't prepared for this. Come in, she said softly, stepping aside to let him enter. Mark hesitated for a moment before crossing the threshold. Joan closed the door behind him, the sound amplifying the heavy silence that followed. They stood there, unsure of what to say, the weight of everything unsaid filling the space between them. Joan could feel the years of tension, the distance they had both created. I've been overwhelmed, Mark said after a long pause, his voice barely above a whisper. Everything. This. All of it. I didn't know what to do, so I ran. Joan felt her heart soften. She had expected anger or coldness, but what she heard was vulnerability. I wasn't ready for you to need me, Mark continued, his voice cracking. I wasn't ready for everything we've been through. I wasn't ready to be the man you needed. The guilt hit Joan like a wave. She hadn't realized how much Mark had been suffering, how much he had needed her and she hadn't been there. She had been so focused on her own pain that she hadn't seen his. You don't have to fix it all right now, Joan said quietly. But I can't keep pretending it's okay either. Mark nodded, his eyes searching hers. I know I've hurt you. I don't know what happens next, but I'm here now. I want to try. Joan felt a small flicker of hope. It wasn't a promise, but it was something, a crack in the wall. They weren't fixing everything, but they were starting, slowly, cautiously. I know it's not going to be easy, Mark said, stepping closer, his voice thick with emotion. But I'm not running anymore. I don't want to lose you. Joan nodded, her heart swelling with something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. Hope. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. It was a beginning. Mark's voice broke the silence again, quieter this time. Mom? The word hit Joan like a punch to the gut. She hadn't realized how much she had needed to hear it, how much it had hurt to be without it for so long. It wasn't perfect, nothing about this moment was, but it felt like the beginning of something. Maybe they couldn't fix everything, but they could start again, slowly, step by careful step. Just then, the doorbell rang, cutting through the fragile moment. Mark looked at her, confusion in his eyes. Joan's heart skipped in her chest. Was it another interruption? Another shift in what they had just started? She walked to the door, opening it to find Emma standing there, a tray of tea in her hands, her usual warm smile lighting up the room. I thought I'd bring something warm, Emma said, glancing between Joan and Mark. Joan stepped aside, letting Emma in. Thanks, Emma. Mark stood awkwardly behind her, and for a moment, Joan felt the familiar pull of fear. Would Emma sense the rawness between them? Would she ask what had happened? But Emma just set the tray down and smiled. Well, she said, her eyes flicking between Joan and Mark, it seems like you two have had quite the conversation. Joan nodded, feeling lighter than she had in ages. We're getting there, she said quietly. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, she felt hope stirring in her chest. They might not have all the answers, but they were starting to rebuild. And that was enough for now. As they all sat down, the weight of the past seemed to shift, and Joan knew this was just the beginning. The conversation between her, Mark, and Emma felt like a bridge between the past and the future. It was fragile, but real. Then, as they settled in, the doorbell rang again. Joan's heart skipped in her chest. What was this? Another knock? Another change to everything they had just started? Emma rose to answer the door, and Joan felt her pulse quicken, uncertain of what was to come next. Joan stood frozen, Mark's presence at the door both familiar and distant. The years of silence between them hung heavy in the air, thick and uncomfortable. His eyes met hers, filled with unspoken words, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. Finally, Mark whispered, Hi. Joan's heart skipped. Come in, she said, stepping aside. Mark hesitated for a beat before crossing the threshold. Joan closed the door behind him, and they stood there in the quiet, the weight of everything unsaid pressing down on them. I've been overwhelmed, Mark began, his voice barely audible. Everything, all of it. I didn't know what to do, so I ran. Joan's heart softened. She had expected anger, but all she heard was vulnerability. I wasn't ready for you to need me, Mark continued, his voice cracking. I wasn't ready to be the man you needed. Joan felt a pang of guilt. She hadn't realized how much he had needed her, how much he had been suffering. She had been so focused on her own pain that she hadn't seen his. "You don't have to fix it all now," Joan said softly. "But I can't keep pretending it's okay either." Mark nodded, eyes searching hers. "I know I've hurt you. I don't know what happens next, but I'm here now. I want to try." Joan felt a small flicker of hope. It wasn't a promise, but it was a crack in the wall. They weren't fixing everything, but they were starting, slowly, cautiously. "I know it's not going to be easy," Mark said, stepping closer. "But I'm not running anymore. I don't want to lose you." Joan nodded, her heart swelling with something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. It was real, even if it wasn't perfect. It was a beginning. Then Mark's voice broke the silence again, his voice quieter this time. "Mom?" The word hit Joan like a punch to the gut. She hadn't realized how much she had missed hearing it. It wasn't perfect, but it felt like the beginning of something new. Slowly, step by careful step. Just then the doorbell rang, interrupting the fragile moment. Joan's heart skipped again, and she glanced at Mark. Was this another interruption? Another shift in what they had just begun? She walked to the door, opening it to find Emma standing there with a tray of tea. "I thought I'd bring something warm," she said, looking between Joan and Mark. "Thanks, Emma," Joan said, stepping aside. Mark stood awkwardly behind her, and Joan felt the familiar sting of fear. Would Emma notice the shift? Would she ask what had happened? But Emma simply smiled and set the tray down. "Well, see, Em's like you two have had quite the conversation." Joan nodded, feeling lighter than she had in ages. "We're getting there," she said quietly. There were no promises, but for the first time in a long time, she felt hope stir in her chest. This was a start, a real one. As they sat down, the weight of the past seemed to lift. But then, the doorbell rang again. Joan's stomach tightened. Another knock? Another shift? Emma rose to answer it, and Joan felt her pulse quicken. What would come next? Would this moment be interrupted again? Her heart raced, unsure of what awaited. As Emma opened the door, Joan waited, breathless. What would happen now? Joan stood in the living room, the quiet feeling, different, now peaceful, but fragile. She had been waiting for something to break the stillness, but the weight of what had passed between her and Mark lingered. The conversation, the vulnerability they had shared, was still hanging in the air. And then Emma entered, bringing a different kind of energy. She had been the steady presence in Joan's life, the friend who had always known when to step in, when to pull back. Today, she was introducing Mark to something new, something that could give him a chance. "Here's the deal," Emma said with a smile, her hands resting on the tray she had brought earlier. "I work with a local company looking for part-time help. I spoke to my boss, and they're interested in meeting you. It's not much, but it's a start." Joan watched as Mark's eyes lit up with cautious hope. He had never been one for handouts, but this felt different. Emma had stepped in because she saw what Joan saw potential, a chance to rebuild. Mark took a deep breath, then looked at Joan, his eyes full of gratitude. "I never expected this," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you, Mom." Joan's heart swelled, but she didn't let herself speak too soon. This moment wasn't just about a Jobit, it was about Mark seeing her, seeing that she hadn't abandoned him. She had been there, quietly, through it all. "You're welcome," Joan replied, her voice soft but steady. "You earned this." The words hung between them, filled with unspoken truths. But for the first time, Joan felt the weight of years of tension begin to ease. Mark was starting to see her in a way he hadn't before. He had seen the support she offered, not as charity but as something real, something he was worthy of. As Emma and Mark left, Joan watched them walk side by side out the door, both of them unsure of what the future would bring, but for the first time in a long while, both of them ready to face it together. She felt a quiet pride, the kind that didn't demand recognition, but settled deep in her chest, a hum of accomplishment. They had taken a step forward. The day stretched out before her as she cleaned up, feeling both fulfilled and cautious. Mark's new job was a small victory, but Joan knew better than to think it was the end of their journey. It was one step. One real step. She could see the shift in him. His confidence, however small, had started to grow, and he was becoming the man he had always had the potential to be. But Joan knew the road ahead would be long and uncertain. Healing didn't happen overnight. She couldn't rush it, couldn't force it. Later that day, Joan found herself walking through the neighborhood, her mind still on Mark's first step toward something new. She was proud, but she kept the caution firmly in place. It was progress, but it didn't change everything at once. As she walked by the newsstand, a local paper caught her eye. There, on the front page, was a photo of Mark and Emma leaving the office, looking uncertain but hopeful. Joan's heart skipped. Proof of progress. It wasn't much, just a snapshot, but it was a sign. She stood for a moment, staring at the image. The world around her felt both familiar and new. For the first time in ages, she felt like she was truly witnessing change. They were on the path, and there was no going back. The small, unassuming moment was a reminder. It wasn't a headline, but it mattered. It meant something. The journey was just beginning, and no matter how slow, it was real. As Joan turned to walk home, her phone buzzed. She looked down and saw a message from Emma. Asterisk. Mom, he got the interview tomorrow. Asterisk. Joan's breath caught in her throat. The next chapter was starting. The road ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time, it felt possible. Joan stood in the living room, the quiet weight of the moment heavy between her and Mark. The vulnerability they had shared still lingered in the air, but now something was different. Mark had been quiet for a while, his face unreadable, before finally holding up the morning paper. Joan's gaze followed his, and she saw the headline, Local Hero and Son Rebuild, a community story of healing and hope. The photo of them walking side by side outside Emma's office was large and unmistakable. The image was both a testament to their progress and a reminder of how much had changed between them. But seeing it thereon, the front page brought a sudden, uncomfortable reality. Mark's face froze as he stared at the paper. His shoulders tensed, and his eyes flickered with unease. Joan knew what it was. This wasn't the life he had chosen to expose. He wasn't ready for the world to know their story. I didn't ask for this, Mark said, his voice barely above a whisper, a mix of frustration and confusion. I don't want all this attention. Joan approached him, seeing the discomfort in his eyes, and laid a hand on his shoulder. I know. I didn't expect this either. Mark sighed, clearly wrestling with the overwhelming exposure. It feels too soon. I'm not ready to be this visible. I don't even know what people will think of us now. Joan gave him a soft, understanding smile. She had been proud of their small victories, but now she was beginning to see the weight of it all. We set the pace, she reassured him. You're not alone in this. We're doing this together. If it's too much, we'll take a step back. It's still up to us how much we share. Mark nodded slowly, but his discomfort didn't fully fade. Joan knew this wasn't just about the photo. It was about how the world was now watching their every step. How would he move forward, knowing his privacy was gone? Her phone buzzed, snapping her from her thoughts. She looked at the screen. A message from Emma. You okay? Joan stared at the message, uncertain how to respond. The attention had been overwhelming, yes, but it was also part of their healing. Was it helping or hindering? She didn't know. I'm not sure, Joan murmured, glancing at Mark. I think he's feeling like the world's eyes are on us more than we're ready for. Mark stood silently, staring at the paper again. After a long pause, he spoke, his voice steady. I don't know if I can handle this kind of attention. I've spent years trying to avoid it. Joan walked over and gently took the paper from his hands, placing it down. We'll find a balance, one step at a time. If we need space, we'll take it. But this is our story, Mark, no matter how it's seen. Before either could say more, the doorbell rang. Joan's stomach tightened with the anticipation of yet another interruption. She opened it to find a small envelope waiting on the doorstep. She picked it up, confused, and opened it. Inside was a short note. It's not too late to protect your privacy. Joan's heart sank. Someone had noticed. The world was watching, and some of them were uncomfortable with it. She turned to Mark, who had seen the same message. He looked back at her, his face full of frustration. I'm deleting my social media accounts, Mark said firmly after a long silence. I can't deal with all of this right now. I need to find my own space. Joan didn't argue. She understood. It wasn't just about the public exposure. It was about Mark's need for control, his need for space. Later that night, Joan found herself staring at her phone again. Emma had sent another message. Mark just deleted his social media accounts. He's really trying to take control. Joan sat still, letting the words sink in. Mark was taking back control, trying to carve out a space for himself that wasn't defined by their story. The road ahead was still unclear, and Joan didn't know what would come of it. But for the first time in a long time, they were both stepping into a new chapter, slowly, cautiously, but with hope. The quiet buzz of her phone pulled her back to reality, a local paper's headline proof of their slow but real progress. And for the first time, Joan let herself believe that this journey was just beginning. Joan stood in the living room, the quiet between her and Mark heavy with unspoken words. The morning paper sat on the table between them, a photo of the two of them leaving Emma's office on the front page. The headline read, "Local Hero and Son Rebuild, a community story of healing and hope." Mark stared at the paper, frozen, his face a mask of discomfort. "I didn't ask for this," Mark muttered, his voice tinged with frustration. "I don't want all this attention." Joan stepped closer, seeing the unease in his eyes. She knew it wasn't just about the photo, it was about the sudden exposure. "I know," she said softly. "I didn't expect this either." Mark sighed, shoulders sagging. "It feels too soon. I'm not ready to be this visible, to be seen like this." Joan understood. She'd been proud of their small victories, but she hadn't thought about how much the attention might affect Mark. "We'll set the pace," she reassured him, her voice gentle. "If it's too much, we'll take a step back. It's still up to us how much we share." Mark nodded slowly, but his discomfort lingered. He had always kept his life private, and now the world was watching. Joan didn't push him further. She simply stayed by his side. Her phone buzzed, and she glanced at it. A message from Emma. "You okay?" Joan stared. At the message, unsure of how to respond. Was the attention helping or hindering their journey? She glanced at Mark, who stood silently, still holding the paper. "I don't know if I can handle all of this," Mark admitted. "I've spent so long hiding, avoiding being seen." Joan gently took the paper from his hands and set it down. "We'll figure it out," she said softly. "One step at a time, and if we need space, we take it. But this is our story, Mark. We don't have to hide from it." Before they could talk more, the doorbell rang, breaking the moment. Joan opened the door to find a small envelope on the doorstep. She picked it up, her heart sinking as she read the note inside. "It's not too late to protect your privacy." Mark saw the note too, his frustration palpable. "I'm deleting my social media accounts," he said quietly. "I can't deal with all of this right now. I need space." Joan nodded, understanding. It wasn't just the public attention. It was about Mark's need for control. He needed to reclaim his space, his privacy. She didn't argue. She simply supported him. Later that evening, Joan found herself staring at her phone, reading a message from Emma. "Mark just deleted his social media accounts. He's really trying to take control." Joan let out a slow breath, feeling a quiet sense of relief. Mark was trying to take back control. It wasn't an easy decision, but it was an important one. They didn't have all the answers yet, but they were stepping into a new chapter together, slowly, cautiously, but with hope. The next morning, Joan felt a shift in the air between them. Mark had respected the space he needed, and Joan had learned to let him find his own pace. Their walks had become their Tamino pressure. No expectations. They were rebuilding, slowly but steadily. One afternoon, after their walk, Mark turned to Joan, his voice quieter than usual. "I feel safe, Mom." Joan's heart swelled. Those words simple, but full of meaning. Safe. It was the first time in a long while that Mark had let down his guard. And for Joan, it was a sign that the road ahead was not without its challenges, but it was real. That evening, Joan found a small note on the kitchen counter. It was from Mark. "Thank you for letting me be me." Joan read the words, her throat tight with emotion. It wasn't much, but it was everything. She knew their journey wasn't finished, but it was moving forward. They were finding their way, step by step. As she set the note down, her phone buzzed again. A message from Emma. "He's ready for the next step." Joan paused, her heart racing. What would the next step be? She didn't know, but for the first time she felt ready for it. The journey was still unfolding, and for the first time in years, she felt hopeful about what was to come. Joan sat at the kitchen table, the sunlight spilling softly across the counter, when her phone buzzed. It was Mark. The simple text read, "Asterisk, Mom?" Asterisk. Her heart skipped. She had been waiting for a message, but this? This was different. She stared at the screen for a moment, then typed back, "Asterisk? Yes, honey. Asterisk." The reply wasn't rushed, and it wasn't forced. She knew now that things between them didn't need to be perfect. It didn't matter if he didn't have all the answers, if he wasn't sure of the future. What mattered was that they were talking, one small word at a time, and hearing him say "Mom" again felt like the first true step in the right direction. The phone buzzed again. Mark's message, "Asterisk, I'm still figuring out the job. It's good, but I'm not sure what's next. I feel uncertain." Asterisk. Joan's heart tightened. She knew that uncertainty all too well. She replied, slowly, carefully, "Asterisk. It's okay to feel uncertain. It's part of moving forward. You're doing great. I'm proud of you." Asterisk. She paused before sending it, the weight of her own pride in her words settling into her chest. It wasn't a grand declaration, just the quiet recognition of the effort Mark was making. Another few moments of silence. The phone remained still, and Joan let her gaze drift to the window. The sunlight filtered through the leaves of the trees, casting a soft glow across the room. It was peaceful, but it felt like something more. A promise. She had spent so much of her life trying to fix everything, but now she understood that healing didn't come from fixing it, came from being present, from letting the process unfold slowly, without rushing it. Finally, her phone buzzed again. Mark's message read, "Asterisk. I'm doing my best, Mom. It's just hard sometimes." Asterisk. Joan felt a surge of emotion. Mark had never been one to share his vulnerability so openly. Her fingers hovered over the screen as she thought about her response. She typed, "Asterisk. It's hard for both of us, but we're getting there, one step at a time." Asterisk. Joan hit send and leaned back, letting out a slow breath. This was what it was all about. The moments in between. The small, steady steps forward. This wasn't a sudden breakthrough. It was progress, quiet and real, happening little by little. Her phone buzzed again, this time with a message from Emma. "Asterisk. How's it going? Any updates?" Asterisk. Joan smiled. She didn't need to explain everything, but it felt good to share the moment. She didn't need to chase perfection. She didn't need to rush. It was enough to know that they were both trying. She replied, "Asterisk. We're getting there, Emma." Slowly but surely. Asterisk. The morning sunlight filled the kitchen, warm and steady, just like the path she and Mark were walking. Joan felt a quiet peace. This was day one, a new beginning. She set her phone down and stood, letting the warmth of the sunlight wash over her. No more questions, no more rushing, just one small step at a time, together. As she walked toward the door, she heard it creak open. Mark stood there, his figure framed by the doorway. Their eyes met. No words needed to be said. Joan smiled, her heart swelling with a quiet hope. This was real. The journey wasn't over, and it wouldn't be easy, but for the first time she didn't feel like she had to push. It was enough to let it happen. And in that silence, Joan knew that they were both ready to face whatever came next, side by side.